Nobody ever tells you that waking up might cause you to break down. This quiet is so enormous and so cruel that it has the potential to consume your very sense of identity, and it is waiting for you behind the golden light of expanded consciousness. Nobody will ever warn you that once the veil is lifted, the first thing you will see is not heaven, but rather the ruins of who you have been down to this point. This is not tranquility. Rather, it is the exhausting strain of clarity. It is not bliss, but rather the gradual and reverberating collapse of all that you believe to be real. This is the hidden price that comes with an awakening of the spirit. Instead of being an ascent, it is a collapse of the system. You had the expectation that awakening would liberate you, but instead, it left you feeling disoriented and confused. You believed that the illusions would go and that you would be able to enter into delight. But instead, you went into nothing, into absence, into the empty space that was left behind when all of the false gods that you worshipped, such as success, approval, identity, and control, started to die. Moreover, that death was a feeling of defeat. You were unprepared for the sorrow that hit you. You did not have the necessary preparation to grieve the person you used to be. You were not ready to hold yourself in the emptiness with no map, no language, and no one cheering you on. You are not capable of doing so. At this point, the majority of individuals make their way back. An attempt is made to reconstruct the previous world. They enter the cages that they are accustomed to. Their eyes were opened for the first time, and they make an effort to forget what they saw. Nevertheless, you did not go back. You did not leave, and that is the reason why it is so painful. Due to the fact that awakening does not mark the conclusion of the illusion. Rather, it marks the beginning of your attempt to confront it. Carl Jung was referring to this concept when he stated, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious. When you wake up, you do not ascend. Rather, you fall into the underworld of your own psyche. You are stepping into the patterns that you have inherited, the traumas that you have buried, the personalities that you have worn, and the shadow that you have spent your entire life pretending is not there. And all of a sudden, you see everything. All of the occasions that you gave up on yourself in order to fit in. The disguises you wore in order to stay alive. The truths that you chose to ignore in order to be liked. You are able to see the void that lies behind the roles. One may perceive the fear that lies behind one's goal. You are able to view the child that is still waiting to be selected within you. On top of that, it breaks your heart because there is no turning back now. Now is the time to stop lying to yourself and believing what you say. You're no longer able to call it free will if you continue to obey the script. You are no longer able to divert your attention with a purpose and insist that it has meaning. For the reason that once your spirit has caught a sight of the true, nothing less will satisfy it. This is the beginning of the collapse, not because you are failing, but rather because you are finally confronting the truth to yourself. That your ego is not capable of saving you is the truth. It is not possible for your brain to retain you. That the integration of your spiritual understanding is not accomplished. Accomplishment is not the same thing as awakening. Rather, it is annihilation. In order for the truth to triumph, the false must perish. When a mask is removed, the face will be exposed for all to see. The tower needs to fall in order for the soul to be able to breathe. You fall, not because something went wrong, but because all that is fake is finally leaving you. This is the reason why you fall. Your stillness, your uncertainty, and the agonizing space that exists between who you were and who you are all come to an end. You are evolving into. If you fall into yourself, then that falling is a precious experience. On the other hand, no one told you that. Nobody informed you that after you open your eyes, you will experience a purge, that your nervous system will rebel, that your friendships will disintegrate, that your passions will dry up, and that the dreams you previously pursued will suddenly feel foreign, useless, and even silly. Nobody told you that after lighting, you would be confronted with immobility, that the fire that once propelled you would go out, that the voice that once guided you would become mute, and that the ambition that you previously relied on would go like smoke. Furthermore, you would be left asking, who am I now? What do I want? What do I believe in anymore? This is the spiritual collapse that you would be experiencing. The threshold is not a mistake or a detour. Rather, it is it. It is the death between lives, the passage between selves, the dark womb of transformation where nothing grows, and yet everything is being rewired, is the phrase that describes this process. You're not broken. Rather, you are being emptied because the life that is coming cannot take up residence inside the framework of the old. If your body is still based on fear, then your nerve system will not be able to transport the divine truth. It is impossible for your relationships to flourish if they were constructed on roles that you no longer fulfill. It is impossible for your dreams to come true if they originated from a state of being that is no longer present. Everything falls apart, and the quiet becomes even more profound. This is not the kind that is calm, but rather the kind that reveals everything. You are in a state of loneliness. You are aware of your anger. You may taste your own sorrow. On the other hand, you confront your shadow not as an idea, but as a partner. In addition, you start to realize that awakening is not like turning on a light switch. A steady burn, a sacred unraveling, and a violent softness that stripped you of illusion and left you trembling but genuine are all characteristics of this experience. You are required to remain in this location. This is the point at which the task starts, for the purpose of not escaping the collapse, but rather giving into it, to allow the false to perish without attempting to save it, for the purpose of allowing the void to speak without filling it. Must let the grief to pass through you without numbing it in any way, because the only way to become whole is to go through the process of collapse. Jung referred to this process as individuation, which he defined as the total integration of one's being. Not just the light, but also the shade as well. In addition to the greater self, there is also the broken self. In addition to the awareness, there is also the unconscious. Not simply the person who is looking, but also the youngster who is the source of the fear. It is not a trek for those who are easily discouraged. It is the most difficult thing you will ever have to do, to watch your life lose significance, to watch your individuality disintegrate, and to let go of who you thought you were without knowing what will come up in its place. On the other hand, this is the only way to make it a reality. The self that you were before the world informed you who you should be, not the self that you perform or the self that you protect. This is the self that you are. Additionally, that self is waiting in the ruins, in the solitude, and in the holy stillness where nothing is moving. Get used to the reality. It is not an indication that you are lost if you are experiencing this collapse that you are feeling, this aching weight that is shapeless and crushing against your spirit. This is an indication that your previous map has become illegible. You are no longer able to find solace in the lies that you formerly believed. The performance is now intolerable to you since you have seen what goes on behind the scenes. The time has come to stop pretending. In your personal connections, at your place of employment, and even in your own ideas. There's a basic conflict within your being, a conflict between the person you were taught to be and the person you actually present yourself to be. This represents the defiance of the soul. At this point, the psychic reorientation threshold has been reached. Carl Jung was intimately familiar with this. He came up with the term antinomy to describe the phenomenon that occurs when an extreme force transforms into its opposite. It is now the light that you pursued that shows your darkness. Your formerly held certainty is now being replaced with uncertainty. The path that you tread with self-assurance has now come to an end in fog. The result is that the ego shakes. During this particular time, it does not have a script, a plan, or any control. It merely surrenders. However, in this context, surrender does not indicate giving up. Allowing is what it means. It is submitting oneself to the enigma. When you say something like, "I do not know who I am anymore," and "I am willing to find out," you are putting yourself in a similar position as the shadow. The part of you that has never been accepted by others, the part that has been forgotten, the part that has been repressed, and the portion that has been disowned. The portion of you that experienced much too much. Both the part of you that was humiliated for wanting more and the part of you that was punished for stating the truth are included in this. This collection of bits has been quietly waiting in the shadows. But now they are knocking, not with the intention of destroying you, but of reuniting with you. Because in order to achieve totality, one must not seek out light. To construct it, one must submit to the darkness. We construct it by acknowledging, yes, that was me too. We construct it by confronting the aspects of ourselves that we were originally instructed to relegate to the background. It is not spiritual to do so. This is in its basic form. The beauty of this is lacking. There is blood here, for the reason that the shadow does not approach gently. When it comes to your illusions, it tears through them like fire through paper. It makes you feel something that you have avoided feeling for many years. It forces you to remain seated in rooms that you have locked. In a surgical manner, it brings up wounds that occurred during childhood. It debunks the myths that you have been told about your personality. Nevertheless, this decline is not a form of punishment. It is the beginning of something. Ego believes that awakening is about reaching a higher level. However, the soul is aware that it starts with the descent. You find yourself drowning in recollections, in sorrow, and in the hurting bones of your past. Somatically, in your chest, in your breath, and in your gut, you feel all that is going on. This is not an intellectual experience. The betrayals, the longing, the guilt, and the loneliness are all things that you remember. And this is the first time that you won't turn your head away. This is the point at which metamorphosis starts. When you are not able to escape the darkness, but rather when you become one with it. It was not to drown, but rather to retrieve what had been buried. The paradox of spiritual awakening is that it is paradoxical. You have to go down in order to climb. In order to transcend, you want to embody. Embracing the human is necessary if one wishes to know the divine. You must first experience a sense of confinement before you can achieve liberation. It is necessary to sit with anger in order to find serenity. You must learn to appreciate your brokenness in order to feel whole. Because of this, waking up could seem like falling apart. Since everything that was constructed on illusion must eventually come to an end, there is no point in failing. When you shed, you shed. The new you that is forming is not an improved version of yourself. The genuine you, the one who is no longer performing and who does not require approval, is the one who is described here. A person who has stopped looking for salvation for themselves in other places. The person who realizes that presence is not something that can be discovered. Rather, it is something that you already possess. You must, however, forget in order to recall. For one to become, one must first become. It is the entirety of who you are that Jung sought to convey when he referred to the self. There is also the shadow in addition to the light. In addition to the awareness, there is also the unconscious. Not only those who have become aware, but also those who have been injured. And as soon as these components come back to you, you start to feel funny, not broken, but disoriented for a moment, due to the fact that this is the very first time that you're not performing. You're not reacting. Your goal is not to make things better. Rather, you're simply being. Being, after a lifetime of trying, seems terrifying because no one taught you how to rest in the self. This is because you have never learned how to be. You have never been taught how to sit still without feeling guilty. You were not taught how to feel without someone explaining it to you. There was no one who instructed you that silence is not empty. Rather, it is truth. To tell you the truth, you were never supposed to seek enlightenment in the first place. All along, you were expected to become aware of what is already present. It was necessary for you to let go of anything that diverted your attention away from the task at hand, including the roles, the goals, the personas, the projections, and the noise. Here you are, in the midst of the silence. Furthermore, the quiet is not devoid of meaning. Rather, it is packed with an abundance of messages, memories, and significance. However, you must remain still for a sufficient amount of time to hear it. The temptation to reconstruct must be resisted at all costs. Since what you lost was never you, but rather the person you believed you needed to be, you have no choice but to have faith in the collapse as a sacred event. What is left over is considered holy, truthful, yet not clean or pure in any way. And in this world, the truth is the most valuable commodity that you can own. Soon after the collapse, there is a peculiar clarity that comes into existence. At this moment, it does not feel like victory. Rather, it feels like silence. As opposed to the tranquility that before the storm, the peace that follows the flood. In spite of the fact that you are looking around at the ruins of your identities, beliefs, and dreams, you do not rush to rebuild. There is no panic on your part. On account of the fact that something more profound has surfaced, you do not rush to put everything back together. However, it was not an explanation or a revelation. Rather, it was a presence, a quiet and persistent awareness that was hidden behind the clamor. There is something that is older than both intellectual and emotional understanding. In that moment of silence, you are able to sense the change. You are no longer the one with the search. You are no longer disoriented because you have come to the realization that you were never intended to locate something. Rather, you were intended to recall. And remembering is not something that occurs as a result of accomplishment. Rather, it occurs as a result of loss, through undoing, and through surrender. This is the point at which the ego is completely eradicated from existence. This is not a violent act, but rather a release. Mostly due to the fact that you are finally liberated from the arduous requirement to be someone. No longer is it necessary for you to be impressive. Getting better is no longer necessary for you. There is no longer a requirement for you to be awakened because you are already awake, and that is sufficient. A reintegration like this is what Jung was referring to. It is not the process of assembling the parts into a perfect whole, but rather the process of coming into completeness and accepting everything that you are, including the light and the dark, the sacred and the scarred, the eternal and the temporary. You do not continue to reject the mess. You quit trying to conceal your hunger. You no longer have the desire to be someone else. You allowed yourself to be completely human. And in that humanity, you find divinity. Not the sort that can be discovered in temples, but the kind that can be found in stillness, in a breath, in a glance, or in a moment when you sense that you are truly there. What it means to become complete is as described above. Neither invincible nor enlightened, but whole in every way. The need to divide yourself in order to be accepted has passed. When you want to feel protected, you no longer wear masks. Due to the fact that you are now at home, you no longer give up on yourself in order to be appreciated. To add insult to injury, the self, the authentic self, is not a luminous being hovering above suffering. A person who returns to the same world but no longer belongs to it is the self. This person is the one who walks back into life with fresh experiences and perspectives, similar to the last task, but without the attachment. These are the same relationships, but there is no performance involved. Although it is the same body, it is revered. The same suffering, but with compassion for it. It is not because you have transformed into somebody new that you have changed. Rather, it is because you have stopped trying to be someone else. This expresses the hushed power of the one who has passed away and then come back. There is no longer a need for you to wait to be saved. No longer are you looking for the next breakthrough in your field. At this point, you are no longer dependent on repairing yourself. You no longer look for significance as a means of evading the void in your life. You have survived by living in the emptiness, which is why you are here today. This survival was not a sign of strength. Rather, it was the reality. Because the fact that you were able to emerge from the shadows is not a sign of weakness, but rather of knowledge. Kinds of things that can't be learned via books. The sort that you get by breaking, by being shattered, and by continuing to choose to breathe despite the experience. Because of this, you have power. Because you are flawless, you do not possess tremendous power. Due to the fact that you are present, you possess power. In its entirety, you are present, without any armor, without any illusion, and without any apologies. Also, this version of you will not be understood by the rest of the world. Those individuals who continue to wear masks will refer to you as weird. You will be referred to as lazy by others who continue to pursue status. You will be referred to as broken by others who are still performing. They are unable to see what you are currently carrying, which is an unshakable serenity, a quiet understanding, and a freedom that no one can give and no one can take away from you for any reason. Now is the time to say goodbye to the previous life and welcome the new one that is to come. That your value is not determined by the amount of work you get done, in which your value is not dependent on the things that you accomplish. In this context, your attractiveness is not determined by how little you require, but rather by how deeply you feel. In this place, you will no longer mix calm with numbness. You will no longer mistake suffering for growth, and you will no longer trade your truth for belonging. Being a part of something now starts from within. You have a right to be yourself. You have faith in yourself. As if in a prayer, you keep coming back to yourself again and over again. And this is what's meant by the term waking up. The goal is not to flee from this life, but rather to live it with fully open eyes. To not transcend your humanity, but rather to embody it with the utmost reverence and accuracy. To not be the light, but to carry it into the darkness without flinching is the more important goal. This is the reason why the collapse took place, mostly due to the fact that the life you are currently constructing is insufficient for the soul that is currently residing within you. The version of you that is emerging from the ashes is coming to life. Light is emitted from her. It was not through fighting the fire that you were able to survive it. Rather, it was via allowing it to consume all that was never truly you. Now, you find yourself standing in the silence that follows the destruction, a peculiar silence that was not lifeless, but rather holy, due to the fact that you have finally realized that you are never lost. You are buried beneath layers of should, beneath masks that you wore so effectively that they forgot they were not your flesh, and beneath scripts that you did not create, but continued to execute in order to satisfy your need to be loved. Now, the roles are no longer available. The production has come to an end. There is a lack of noise in the theater. Unfiltered, raw, and unapologetically awake, you're the only real thing that remains. And there is a holy thing that is both terrible and holy. To awaken, not in the sense of theory, but in the sense of actuality. To move around the world without guarding your heart, and to travel freely. Must pay more attention to your heart than to your own thoughts. To use one's voice without reducing it, to love without taking possession, and to exist without being granted permission. After the collapse, this is what it means to live in their aftermath. You are no longer driven by the need to prove something. Fear no longer exerts its influence on you. Due to the fact that you have moved away from the self, you're no longer expecting the exterior world to define you. Jung's concept of the self encompasses the entirety of your mind, including your conscious and unconscious states, your shadow and light sides, your child and your elder, your ego and eternity. Healing is not something that the self seeks. It is not inclined toward transcendence. It does not reject the existence of pain. Rather, it incorporates it. Both the wound and the wisdom are included inside it. Grief is welcomed by it, as if it were an old friend. It does not venture into the unknown because it is certain, but rather because it adheres to its principles. Faithful not to belief, but to truth and existence rather than to belief. To that still, small voice that lies behind every story and whispers that you are already perfectly whole. Furthermore, when you are entire, you no longer have a need to be understood, which is a significant adjustment. You have compassion for yourself. You are no longer in need of being saved since you have quit giving up on yourself. If you are meaning, there is no need to seek it out. You are meaning. You only need to breathe once. It is holy that you remain still. Your life, in its current state, is the temple that you have been looking for all along. And so it is that you come back, not as the one who was looking for anything, but as the one who discovered something that cannot be named. Even if you're going back to the same environment that broke you, you're going back in a different way. Your eyes have been able to see through the fantasy. You have been through the fire with your body. Your soul has recalled the name of its own being. Also, you're no longer fighting against what is. Your resistance to the ebb and flow has been removed. Like a wave that no longer fears the tide, like a flame that no longer fears the dark, and like a star that no longer fears annihilation, you eventually become it. simply because you are aware of what lies underlying conclusions. You are aware that there is a rebirth that lies beneath every fall. A more profound life lies behind every passing. That is the life that you are currently living. The one that does not include performance. The one that does not need to be validated and accepted. This is the one that is solely yours and no one else's. However, this liberation is not the freedom that the ego promised. Freedom from escape, freedom from status, freedom from control. Rather, it is the freedom of surrender, the freedom of presence, the freedom of standing naked in your truth and proclaiming, "This is who I am." Not only do you no longer dread emptiness, but you also no longer owe the world a version of yourself that is consistent with its delusion. The place is familiar to you. No longer do you have a fear of silence. You have developed into it. Having finally reached a point where you comprehend who you are, you no longer worry about being misunderstood. In addition, something has opened up in this area, something that is ageless. It is not loud or magnificent. It is just real. A slow and steady pulse throughout your chest. A freshness in the way you breathe. There's a quietness in your eyes. Not only did the collapse show you, but it also did not destroy you. You didn't wake up with the intention of escaping the world. Rather, you wanted to engage it. Instead of using armor, you should use awareness. The goal is not to surpass other people, but rather to stand fully, lovingly, and unwaveringly within yourself. This is the return that Jung was referring to, the return to the self, the return to the soul, the return to a life in which you're no longer acting but inhabiting, no longer reacting but responding, and no longer seeking but being. And in this process of becoming, you do not lose yourself. Rather, you come face to face with yourself, in the present moment, not in the future, nor in the state of perfection. You're already at this very moment, in this very breath, at this very moment, in this stunningly beautiful reality.